All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about a place that really punches way above its weight, the tiny island nation of Malta. Seriously, its history is just so much bigger than its size. For thousands of years, its spot right in the middle of the Mediterranean made it a prize for empires and, really, a melting pot of culture.
I mean, just look at where it is, smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily. It's been a hotspot for trade, for war, for everything really, since civilization began. We're talking Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, the Knights. They all came through, and every single one of them left their mark, creating this incredible tapestry of history. So, that's the big question we're tackling, isn't it? How did this tiny little island group end up playing such a huge role in history? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to peel back all those layers and see how this place went from having these mysterious, ancient origins all the way to becoming a fortress for empires. Let's dive right in. Okay, so we're starting at the very, very beginning. I'm talking deep prehistory. Long before any of the famous empires you've heard of even existed, Malta was home to a civilization that left behind some of the most mysterious and, honestly, mind-boggling structures on the entire planet. So, this timeline really puts things into perspective, doesn't it? For a long time, everybody thought Malta's story started with farmers about, 5900 BC. But recent discoveries have pushed that date back by more than 1,000 years. It turns out hunter-gatherers made an incredible journey by sea from Sicily 8,500 years ago. But the most famous chapter, the one that really gets people talking, kicks off around 3850 BC. This is when the temple builders show up. 50 tons. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. That's the weight of a single stone these people were moving. Without wheels, without any metal tools. The temples they built are some of the oldest freestanding stone structures in the entire world. We're talking older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids in Egypt. It's just incredible. So, here's what they had to work with. Stone mallets, some sharp rocks, wooden levers, and, well, that's pretty much it. Just sheer human power. To create what they did with this basic toolkit, it's just mind-bending. It tells you they must have been incredibly organized, super ingenious, and they had to have some powerful shared belief that got everyone working together to pull this off. The gap between their tools and their achievements is just staggering. And this is maybe the biggest mystery of all. After 1,500 years of building of this amazing culture, they just vanished. Around 2050 BC, they disappear completely from the archaeological record. So what happened? Did they run out of resources? Was it some kind of disease? An invasion? Honestly, we still don't have a definitive answer. So, after the mystery of the temple builders, a whole new chapter for Malta begins. The island's perfect natural harbors made it, well, a must-have piece of real estate for pretty much every major power sailing the Mediterranean. It was just too valuable to ignore. And what follows is this rapid-fire succession of rulers. First, you've got the Phoenicians, the great sea traders. They show up around 700 BC and call it Melith, which means safe harbor. Perfect name. Then the Romans take over, call it Melite, and bring in all this prosperity and fancy villas. And then, in 870 AD, the Arabs arrive, and their influence is huge, especially when it comes to the language. You can see how each one just adds another layer to the story. And you can see that layering effect so clearly here. The Roman legacy is all about administration, law, and luxury. You can still see the ruins of their villas. But the Arabs, they totally transformed daily life. They brought in new crops like citrus and cotton, sophisticated irrigation, and they fortified the main city, which they called Medina. And most importantly, they left behind the Semitic roots of what would become the Maltese language. Now this is the really cool part. These influences didn't just wipe each other out. They started to mix, to blend together. And this is where a truly unique Maltese identity starts to take shape. This fascinating culture that has one foot firmly in Europe, but its language, its linguistic roots are in the Semitic world. It's a real hybrid. Then, in 1091, you get this huge turning point. The Normans, led by Count Roger I of Sicily, show up. This ends more than 200 years of Arab rule and pulls Malta decisively into the orbit of Christian Europe. This one event basically sets the course for the island's entire future, both politically and culturally. But what happened to the language is just wild. The Arabic dialect that people were speaking there, this Siculo-Arabic, it didn't just disappear with the Normans.
Nope. It survived, but it evolved in isolation, slowly soaking up words from Sicilian and Italian, and that is how you get modern Maltese. Think about this. It is the only Semitic language in the entire European Union and the only one written with the Latin alphabet. It's the perfect example of that unique cultural mix.
But it's important to realize this change wasn't like flipping a switch. It was a slow burn, as you can see here. The Normans arrive in 1091, right? But it takes another few decades for their rule to really be set in stone. And it's not until around 1250, that's over 150 years later, that the last of the Muslim population is expelled. That's when the island's identity becomes firmly, and finally, Christian.
Now we get to the era that would totally transform Malta's landscape, and honestly, its place in the world forever. This is when the legendary Knights of St. John arrive on the scene.
So who were these knights? Well, they'd been a really powerful military order, going all the way back to the Crusades. But they had a bit of a problem. In 1522, they got kicked out of their awesome fortress on the island of Rhodes by the Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman the Magnificent. So for 7 years, they were basically wandering around Europe, homeless and desperately needing a new base of operations to keep up their fight. So when the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V offered them Malta, well, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. The first report from a knight who went to check it out was pretty bleak. You have to remember, they'd just lost Rhodes, which was this lush, green, wealthy island. Malta, by comparison, was a serious downgrade. But, beggars can't be choosers. So in 1530, they took the deal. The agreement was pretty straightforward. They could have the islands as their permanent home base, but they had to pay an annual rent to the emperor, and that rent was one single Maltese falcon. Yep, that's it. The knights immediately got to work, turning the island into a fortress. They knew their old enemies, the Ottomans, weren't just going to ignore a brand new Christian stronghold right in the middle of their sea. A massive showdown was inevitable. It was just a matter of when, and that when turned out to be the year 1565. And that showdown would become the legendary Great Siege of 1565, probably the most famous event in all of Maltese history. But that's a story for another time. What we've seen today is this incredible pattern of reinvention. You go from these mysterious ancient temples to a prize passed between empires, to the forge of a unique culture, and finally to the fortress of these warrior knights. Malta's story is all about resilience. It's about how a place is constantly being remade by the tides of history, which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What layer will be added next?